Good afternoon. My name is Jody Engel. I am an alumnus and trustee at the College for Creative Studies, and it's my privilege to introduce this week's episode of Afternoon Creative Boost, presented by the College for Creative Studies. This is a series for students, faculty, alumni, and friends of CCS to infuse their afternoon with a quick blast of inspiration and conversation, featuring short talks led by some of the most influential leaders in creative and rapid growth industries. This week, I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Ellie Schneider. Ellie is the Director of City of Design at Design Corps Detroit. Ellie will be speaking with our guest and my good friend, Uday Dandavate. Uday is the CEO and co-founder of Sonic Rim and the author of A Window for a Home Without Walls. Just a reminder, everyone, this Zoom will be recorded and all questions should be shared with Matt in the chat. And Matt will also post Uday's bio in the chat for everyone's convenience. With that, I'll turn it over to Ellie and Uday to discuss the importance of curiosity, compassion, creativity, and how design can play a more virtuous role in a more equitable future for us all. Thank you. Take it away, Ellie.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you so much, Jody, and thank you, College for Creative Studies, for hosting this conversation. Uday, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us virtually, and we're excited to talk about a couple different aspects of your creative identity. Of course, traditionally, you are trained as a designer. You are CEO of Sonic Rim, which is a design research firm, but we're here today to talk about a very different project, a recent book of poetry that you published. So could you tell us a little bit more about this book and where it came from and how it reflects the full spectrum of your identity?
So this is interesting. I would say this book is an unintentional phase of my evolution. I started off, as you said, as a designer. In early part of my career, I was designing products, features, artifacts. From there, over a period of time, after practicing design for a long time, I went back to graduate school and I became a design researcher. And in that capacity, I became a storyteller. And as I traveled around the world, had dialogue with people, started observing people, listening to their stories, understand their emotions, their concerns, my mind began to open up. I became more curious. I began to give up my values and norms as a designer and began to look at life with their own eyes. And suddenly something happened. It wasn't deliberate. And one fine morning, I was on a hill looking at San Francisco, and a feather went flying by and I tried to catch it and it went away. That night, I woke up at 3 o'clock and I wrote a poem, my first poem. It's called An Untucked Feather in my book. And since then, this was 8 months ago, I've been waking up anywhere between 1 and 3 at night and writing a poem. When pandemic hit, my wife suggested to me that, hey, you need to compile this into a book and see what's going on with you. And that's how it happened. In 5 weeks' time, a small team of us got together, put the book together and published it out. So my evolution is from a designer of artifact to a storyteller to now a poet. None of the previous parts get left out, but it builds on your awakening, your sensitivity, and your outlook towards shaping people's imagination.
I think that's a very interesting point, is it doesn't change who you are, but I think it's about adding perspective, and it sounds like this time at home has allowed you a lot of time for internal reflection. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really curious about why a feather, and for a designer, somebody who makes things and goods and products, and what was it about this feather that spoke to you and that shifted your perspective about life?
That's a great question. One thing I've learned when I was in graduate school at Ohio State, that after all, the human endeavor is about sense making, about meaning making. And what we are looking for, besides comforts of everyday activities, we are looking for meaning in everything that we do. And what I learned from the theory of communications is that all meaning making, which is conceptual, subconscious, is driven by metaphors. And I have been working with metaphors in my design research process, but when the feather appeared in my reality, in my sleep, it got translated into a metaphor. So the poem became a metaphor. So my answer to you is, when you open your eyes, become curious, and look around you, there are enough things that escape our attention when we are intentional that can serve as a provocation for creating new meaning.
So this work is obviously a huge reflection of yourself and your own journey, but it sounds like it has had a tremendous impact on many others within the design world, within the education world, but far beyond that as well. So can you talk a little bit about the response to the work so far and maybe what surprised you?
As I was developing the book, I had to wear two hats. One is being my true self, to learn, grow, evolve from what was going on inside of me and stay authentic to that. But also I had to wear another designerly hat and think about, who is my audience? How do I want to design it? How do I want to present it? What medium do I have to use to take it to people? And in that process, I decided that I want to be true to my profession and focus this on students of design, because I set myself a goal that through these poems, I want to cultivate curiosity, compassion, and creativity in future students of design. I was amazed and surprised that the reactions came from all kinds of people, not just designers and design students, doctors, therapists, a flight crew, a musician, a student of music, music therapist. All kinds of people began to write to me, began to write on Amazon, and they began to feel that this was something that they could feel was their own inner voice and not a poem written by an author that was talking to them. And in that process, there were different kinds of reactions. One student of music at Carnegie Mellon, he was inspired to compose a cappella, a concert around my poems. Another person who is a music therapist in Hawaii, she literally read the book, she closed the book, she opened it again and started recording an entire soundscape audio book. She wrote to me saying, is it okay if I put it out? I said, as long as it's free, give it out, share it. So what's going on is consistently people are craving for meaning, questioning themselves, seeking for a new direction, seeking for a new awakening in this COVID period. And as I've said before, I don't own these poems. They came to me through serendipitous events in my life. And it's just that my designerly curiosity and an open mind that I learned as a design researcher allowed it to pass through me. And so they are owned by nature, they're owned by the time, it's owned by life, and people find it easy to just embrace it and make it their own. But they all consistently said, reading that poem created in them a sense of healing and hope.
I think that this work right now is very timely because we have this moment where we're forced to slow down, forced to spend time with ourselves, forced to reflect on the way we live and practice. And a lot of what you just said really kind of flies in the face of a lot of sort of traditional design practice and where design originated came from. This idea of creating something and giving it away for free is kind of a radical idea. And I'm curious about how you juxtapose those two sides of yourself, or if you really feel like it's sort of more of a spectrum, but it's an interesting idea.
It's interesting that your questions are following my internal process right now.
And not at all the questions that I shared with you before we started the conversation.
Yeah, but it didn't structure it. It's naturally evolving. So this is great. I would say one thing I've learned through this 39 years since I graduated out of design school is that the biggest impediment of being a good designer is our ego. And as you surrender your ego, open your mind, and start seeing the world from different lenses, you begin to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you as the center. Life has its own design, and you have to find a place to participate in life's design.
Mhm.
And so in that process, my concept of design has evolved. And what I have discovered is that something interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with my professor of design from 40 years ago. And he's old now, he's nearing 80. He's become a recluse, he doesn't talk a lot to people. And one of the things that I want to share with you guys is he said, this whole idea of human-centered design, it just doesn't appeal to me. He said, when I taught you design, when I taught you foundations of design, I tried to bring out the humanity in you. I tried to trigger the child in you. I tried to help you understand how to care for humanity and how to bring out your human capacities. And to say that I, as a designer, sit outside of that humanity and I have to create a design that's centered on humans, it almost makes you an alien. Whereas what is needed today is we have to reclaim our humanity and become more human. And I think that was something that he said to me, and that helps me come back to your question is that I think what this poetry and this whole, my comparison of this new evolution of my thinking and creativity and design as a practice, what we need to really do is we need to become human. You know, in the old days, when a craftsman made crafts or a tailor made clothes or a potter made pots, he was not doing human-centered design. He was just symbiotically creating something for you. And you were working together. When the tailor was measuring your body, when the potter was sitting in front of you and creating something for you, there was no me as a separate, as a designer, as a separate from you as a part of the society, of the community. And I think what we need to do is we need to move from human-centered design to life-centric design. And the in-between part for that shift is, I would say, I would appeal to students is start thinking about not as a user, not as a group of a family or whatever, but think of it as a society. Broaden view to how the society works and start thinking of design in terms of shaping the society rather than designing for humans other than yourself, and enhancing the desires and triggering the desires of the users. That's a completely misplaced orientation to design. So that's, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did, and brought up others as well. I think a lot of this poetry also speaks to the limitations of this idea of human-centered design and the impact that has had on the rest of the planet. And not only are we at this moment where we're sort of stuck in time, but the realities of the world that we've created and all of the stuff we've created is staring us in the face right now. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how, you've also evolved in terms of sort of you're thinking about design, for a whole environment and for a better environment, and other thoughts you have on what needs to shift or change in terms of how designers are working right now to respond to that.
Excellent, thank you. This is another thing that came up in my conversation with my teacher again, and I think it's always good to reference back to somewhere your roots of your values that came from. So the other thing that he talked about during our conversation was that stop designing for people. We have to stop designing with people. And then the other thing he said is that you have to be a bystander and not the powerhouse that controls design. You have to design the imagination of the society. And that comes from participating in a dialogue, in shaping stories that shape social imagination. The literature, the art, and everything that shapes how people want to live, their aspirations, their values, their culture. And through that will emerge directions for design. And that was something powerful. And that's what is changing my view of design, is that design doesn't begin either with designers, nor does it end with designers. Design begins in social imagination that's shaped by storytellers, filmmakers, all these kinds of people. And then we are just people who give it a form or give it a language. And then we put it out, people take it, make it a part of their life, and they keep modifying it and evolving it. And it continues to evolve. So how do we become that participant which has some unique skills to translate, understand the social imagination, provoke it, bring it into the mainstream, and create a dialogue through which a variety of possibilities, artifacts emerge, and then they get introduced. So I saw my poetry as a way to give design back to people, because that poetry came from my designerly way of thinking and being curious. It does give me framework for thinking about the world. And if I gave that poetry to people and it became a part of everybody's vernacular, they would use that to see a world, and not just designers, but real people. And just like a poem in the past shapes people's imagination. For example, Humpty Dumpty, nobody cares who wrote that poem, but it's a part of our growing up. It's a part of what we give to our next generation, that story, that song, that poem. And through that creates a visualization, and through that creates an understanding and a projection. Can we as designers create these enduring poems of life that build imagination in people and a purpose and a meaning to work towards bringing alive some aspects of this beautiful life of the future?
So when you imagine that, are there examples of projects or places right now that you can think of that are exemplifying this well?
I would say yes, but of course, because I'm bound by client confidentiality, I cannot disclose those projects, and they all take long term. I would say some of them are in Michigan. Some of them are with companies that realize that they need to keep up with change. I wouldn't mind giving credit to some of those companies without disclosing what they're doing. The Ford Motor Company is being bold in questioning what the future looks like. We've been a participant in that process. I can, without disclosing what we've done together and what they're doing with others, I can say that they are trying to widen their view of the world. They are trying to learn from the future as it's emerging and adjust their way of designing and innovating in ways. There are other companies that we worked with in Michigan, in other parts of the world, that are doing that. So I think what is making people do is the pandemic is creating a realization with everyone that the future may not be just a continuation of what the past was, and that people are fundamentally questioning and pre-prioritizing their way of living. And these companies have to be aligned with how those shifts are happening. What kind of a future is arriving, so that they can not only try to push back what they were or what their products were, what their services were, but to write a new way of engaging with their customers. And in that, I can say one thing, which is not with reference to pandemic, but 7 years ago, I was invited to a conference of corporate real estate developers to talk about future of work. And this is 7 years ago, and it's published, it's on my Medium, I published it. It was published, my interview was published in the registry. I had said that a time will come when the ivory towers that corporates build and maybe even create enticing, joyful experiences within that will not be any relevant anymore, because innovation and design will happen out in the community. And therefore, the imperative would be for corporates to start building communities, move into the communities, let design happen in the communities. the kind of impetus you're creating for inspiring innovation in your four walls of your corporate real estate needs to be put out in the real world. Let people interact with each other and let innovation happen there. And that's where, like, I predicted that, and look at this, what's happening now. There's people, corporates are realizing that people are finding a new comfort in working from home, a new blending of work and life. And though there are people who are eager and dying to get back to their old ways of doing things, I see there's a large group of people who want to shape a new way of working. They don't want to commute. They don't want to be stuck in traffic. They think I can do this sitting in my home with my bedroom seeing, my kids hovering around, my dog stretching. All of that is a part of our real reality. And we don't need to be pretentious. We can be just real and still create something new. And I think that's what is going to happen now.
I think that's a really interesting idea. But I guess just to play devil's advocate, when so many of us live in a reality where we're really separated from people who don't share our experience economically, socially, racially, is there a risk that by being isolated and not connected and not coming together that we could lose some of that ability to, appreciate humanity beyond our own experience?
Yes, I'm not saying we should not go out, we should be stuck at home. I'm saying we should live life that is real life. I would love to free roads of cars and fill them with joyful experiences that people could have in the streets. I'm beginning to see that in San Francisco, restaurants are allowed to move into the parking spots and create sitting areas outside. Can we just block some streets for people to come together and have fun, be creative? Why do we need people spending the time they don't want to spend on the roads, commuting from work to home, when they could be at home, when they need to work, step out and have fun with each other, exchange ideas, and think of a new future? So the streets are meant to inject life. They're not meant to inject traffic jams.
Mm-hmm. That's a fair point, and one that resonates in the Motor City here. I'm curious, I guess, you talked about wanting to, positioning this book for students. And so I want to kind of circle back to that and ask if you could wave a wand and reimagine what design education looks like right now to better prepare designers with this more holistic perspective. What are some of the ways in which you could see, things changing, or you'd like to see things change in order to prepare a generation of designers that's ready for what we have ahead?
Honestly, there's nothing new that I see, but there's something that I learned when I went to design school in 1975 at the National Institute of Design in India, which was formed under the influence of Charles and Ray Eames. And then Bucky Fuller contributed to its evolution, and Victor Papanek came and taught us, and so many other people were thinking of foundational values in design. So one of the big things that I learned in the first year of foundation, which is what needs to be preserved, is I was told on the first day in the design school, your job in the foundation year is to unlearn everything you have learned and reclaim your childlike curiosity. And that has stuck with me. And in that year, we were taught to open our mind, look around, and sense the environment, to put behind our biases, to interact with people in the real world, and to understand how they live. Now, the first year was not about design. It was about getting closer, removing your blinders and getting closer to life. And I think that's the basic thing. And that was the reaction, like even Bauhaus was a reaction to Industrial Revolution, right? So now we are mandated with the new revolution. I would say this whole information technology has created a new challenge for us. I would like to show you a very interesting picture. Here are two images juxtaposed of children from totally different realities. One image reminds me of my childhood and childhood of many people in the audience here. We were encouraged to go out in the real world, play in the streets, play with real people in the real world, get our hands dirty in the sand, and observe and smell the world. The children here are studying ants. They're going to be touching the ants, and they're going to learn life lessons from that. On the other hand, in the second image, we see a young child touching a tablet. I've seen from my travels around the world that the first time that a child is able to hold a tablet in her hand and start browsing through images, parents hand over a tablet to them or a phone to them as if it were a babysitter and go off on their own to do their jobs. That job may be their own devices or chores at home or something else. I'm concerned that children of tomorrow are going to miss out on the sensory experience of life. Their mental models are going to be built by intelligent systems that do not have the information needed to understand the sensory experiences that surround us. We live in a motor city where companies are tinkering with technologies that are going to bring machine learning, data mining, autonomy into play to create conveniences, productivity, and efficiency in our lives. My appeal to designers is be mindful. Technology is meant to empower us. It's meant to open opportunities for us to think creatively, to reach out and explore the real world, not to get trapped in a digital world, not to become slaves of technology. So when you tinker with technologies, think about striking a balance between empowering your intelligence and enhancing your sensitivities to the world. Do not miss out on your observation power. Do not miss out on your childlike curiosity of the world that surrounds you. That's a message to take away from these two images. I'm now going to move the screen and read you my poem. This poem was triggered by mass exodus of labor from the cities in India to their villages. The day lockdown was announced in India, people were given 4 hours to collect whatever they needed to and then get locked in. The daily wage earners who form the lifeline of the cities wouldn't have any money to pay their rent. They wouldn't have money to put food on the plate of their children. Next morning, millions of laborers started walking towards their villages hundreds of miles away. With their belongings in their hand, the children in tow. Some of them died on the way, but they had one thing in mind. They needed to get back home where they felt safer. I was so pained to see those images. That night, I woke up at 1 o'clock and wrote this poem. A humanitarian crisis. They are our neighbors, yet we treat them as encroachers, as a blot on the beauty in our city. They cleaned our homes, cooked for us, built our houses, manufactured the products we use every day, constructed the roads and the dams and the bridges. They built the life we enjoy, served us food, cleaned our streets, moved containers that brought us goodies from around the world. We complained because they were crowding our cities. We mocked them because they practice a different culture. We forced them to speak our language while we ridiculed theirs. We want them to adapt and assimilate. They left their homes and their land so they could live a life of dignity and support their families. They lived in squalor so their families would not starve. They lived with so little so we could have more than we need. They suffered in poverty while we enjoyed upward mobility. Today, we feel trapped in our homes because our jobs and our ambitions never give us the time to fully experience home. Today, we rush to stock up toilet paper and hand sanitizers because we've become slaves to convenience. Today, as we practice staying at home, hand washing and social distancing, they neither have homes nor food. They do not have water, nor do they have space for social distancing. From the comfort and luxury of our homes, we log on the internet and feel aghast at millions of labor crowding our streets and buses and trains to go back to their villages, to go back to the security of their families. They believe the villages they left behind offer enough space to survive, and the cities they build are at risk of becoming mass graves. Today they realize that we are a risk they cannot live with. Today we realize they are a lifeline we can't live without. The real question before us is, while we obsess about preserving our lives and getting back to our lifestyle, how might we protect those who we depend on for our survival and pleasure while hiding in a bubble? My request to the students of design is, as you think about the future beyond pandemic, embrace curiosity, compassion, and creativity. Let the future be built on compassion and empathy and not on ego and arrogance. Thank you.
Definitely something to sit with. And I think so many of the works right now, I'm not surprised that you're getting the reactions that you are, because everything just hits really close to home right now. So I appreciate that, and strongly encourage everybody to check out the book and to read the rest of the poems. I think, that's a perfect example of the moment we're in. I do have one other question from our audience here. We're just asking for a little clarification. Earlier on, you had mentioned designing with and designing for people being not ideal. And you spoke about striving to design for society, which includes designing for ourselves. And the question is whether or not that's an accurate representation of your remarks, or if you wanted to clarify that.
Okay, so let me clarify. So I do believe that designing with people is the way to go, because that's how you become a part of the entire design process, from social imagination to people's lives. When I mentioned it, the in-between step of designing for the society, I'm trying to move us from designing for people to human-centered design to, I'm just saying that don't design for humans, design for society. You will broaden your outlook. That's only a stepping stone into doing life-centric design and designing with people. So yeah, it may have sounded a little paradoxical, but this is where I was just essentially, because as designer, my job is not only to project the ideal and the utopia, but also create a roadmap for getting there. And I believe that society-centric design is the next milestone in creating a life-centric design.
How would you define society when you use it in those terms? And how does that look different, I guess? I'm just trying to get a picture of what that would look like if you were really to shift in that direction.
So I'm not defining it per the definition of sociology, but I'm defining it more in terms of how I feel it and experience it.
Mhm.
In my broadening of my landscape of what I design, more and more I have become curious about the factors outside of my control that influence how we live,
Mhm.
how I live, how we live, and how um, the whole world lives with each other, how they find communities, and also how they live in harmony with nature. So we are a big part of the universe, and my curiosity has grown to how the universe works and how it goes deep inside. And that's why one of my poems here was inspired by Charles Eames's movie Powers of 10, where it takes you out to the shape of the universe outside and takes you deep inside to the universe inside. And both the ends look the same as a form,
Hmm.
and essentially giving me a realization that we are only a floating grain in that universe between the microorganism and the extra, the large universe. So to me, the society is just another word of that ecosystem of universe
Mhm.
in which the behaviors that we can influence and participate in are my narrower grasp of a society. I may not be able to define how Mars moves, but I may be able to influence how we learn from COVID and alter our behaviors in the streets or in relationship to each other.
Thank you for diving deeper into that. We have one more question, really a request for some advice before we close out here. We have a communication designer who's asking for advice about how in their position they bring more people and have that more society sort of view to the work that they do. So any advice for someone working in communication design?
If you don't mind, can you repeat the question?
So the question is, could you clarify in the process of designing with people as a communication designer, learning how to create experiences that work well for everyone? I'm curious how to bring more people into that process.
That's great. Um, I would say if you assume or if you accept that each one of us, regardless of our training, has innate creativity, I think designers hold the opportunity to bring out the creativity in everyone who has a stake in the community, the organization, the city, or the world that they live in. And I think when you bring the creativity of all together and give them the tools of communicating with each other and creating with each other, what will emerge is more inclusive and more relevant to the way of supporting each other. So I would say you using designerly way of learning and creating from the curiosity and openness that we have, and using a filter of empathy to trigger people to care for each other and design for each other will be a great platform for communication designers.
It sounds like you're saying that it's a shift in a way from picturing yourself as the expert to more of a facilitator of the design process. That's great. Great advice. Thank you. Well, Jody, are we out of time here?
I think we're out of time. I'm going to have to pull the hook. Well, thank you, Ellie and Uday. I mean, Uday, you always blow my mind and bring such meaningful conversation. And Ellie, you did such a great job to provoke some really great answers. So thank you both. I just want to thank everyone else for joining today. This Zoom will be available on the CCS website and on the CCS YouTube channel shortly. Our next Creative Boost is on October 22nd, 2020 at 3 p.m. And that will be featuring Javak Bedve, who is the principal and director of strategic growth at Sundberg Farrar. And he will be speaking about good design is good business. So, and this link will be shared just after this is over shortly. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day and weekend.